In this video, we'll look at the use of copy and move commands, as well as how to update your system very easily from the command line. Alright, let's get into our Mint installation. Typing in our password. Yeah, it looks like I didn't type it appropriately. There we go. Okay. Let's clear the screen, and what we'll do is that we will look at a few commands that will prove very useful, the copy and the move command, as well as how to update your system. And let's go back to our home directory. And now let's see how to update our system. The updating the system can be done in several ways. If you're using the graphical user interface, there is something that's akin to the automatic updates that occur with Windows. But we can't always rely on having a graphical user interface when we're using Linux. And so we'll use a command that will allow us to manually not only update our system, but also to add different packages, software packages, and remove software packages. And that is called aptitude. Now, and that's spelled just like it sounds, A-P-T-I-T-U-D-E. And don't hit enter, but you can take a look at that. Oh, and by the way, this is a command. And recall that we've been using the tab key when we've been specifying a directory or a file for auto-completion. And you know, this also works with commands. And so if we type APT, let's hit the tab key once, twice, and you note that all commands that begin with APT are shown here. And so what that shows you is the commands that partially match completion of APT. And so we look through here and we'll see, in fact, let's do this for a couple of different commands. I'm not going to cover these just quite yet, but I'm just going to show you how this works. Let's say we type WH and hit tab once, twice, and it shows you that there are a number of different commands that begin with WH. And you could go ahead and try to run some of these. So for example, if you wanted to run, let's say who am I? Right here, if we type who am I, hit enter, and it shows you who you are. We'll walk ourselves backward a little bit to show you, and it's something that I alluded to in a previous video, is that there is a user called root, and root is the god of the computer, just like the administrator is the god of Windows systems. And those accounts are used for security purposes, and they have the highest level of security associated with them because they can do anything. You can actually go in and wipe out the entire system if you're running as either root under Linux or administrator under Windows. So we know that under Windows we would log in as administrator, or we could use the run as command when we're logged in to run something as administrator. Well, how do we do the same thing under Linux? And there's actually a couple of different ways to do this depending upon what type or what distribution of Linux you're using. If you're using a Red Hat based version, you can actually log in as root, but the Debian based versions of Linux distributions, which would include Ubuntu and Mint, do things a little differently. They don't allow you to log in as root, and the reason is that if you do log in as root, you could very easily damage your system irreparably, because, as I said again, root can do anything. And so you might accidentally remove files that would totally hose your system to the extent that you couldn't log in and you couldn't do anything. So the way that Mint and Ubuntu handle the situation is that they allow you to run a command that requires root privileges on a command by command basis, and we do that through the use of the sudo command. This is a very important command because what this allows you to do is to, as I said again, is to run commands as root. For example, to update your system. You shouldn't just allow anybody, for example, to install packages or remove packages or update your system. That should be left up to the administrator to do so. And so sudo, actually the original version of this was called SU, and you would type SU and hit enter. We're not going to do that here, but what that meant was switch user, or it also sometimes referred to super user, and super user was root. And then you could go ahead and provide your password and you could log in as root. Well, as it turns out, while there is a root user under Mint and Ubuntu, you can't actually log in as root, but you can run commands on a command by command basis as root using the sudo command. Okay, so I said, let's getting back to aptitude, A-P-T-I-T-U-D-E, and I'll show you how this works with both sudo and aptitude. So what we're saying is sudo means I want to run a command as root. This the command I want to run is called aptitude, and to update our system it's actually a two-step process. And the first process is to type update. And what update does is that once you click enter, it's going to ask for your password. So what this is saying is, in this instance, is that me PC is allowed to use the sudo command to run aptitude as root. Now, as it just so happens, when you install initially your Linux distribution, whomever is included as the first user gains this privilege. That is, they are allowed to use sudo to root. And so here you would simply provide your own password and hit enter. Before I do that, let's back up one more time and explain what update does. So you've got a number of different software packages and system files located on your Linux distribution. What the aptitude and update does is to go out and get a new listing of the most recently updated packages and compares them against what you've already got installed on your system. If there's anything newer, update and aptitude will work hand in hand to actually compare the two and end up telling you what you need to update. And actually there's one more command used for that. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And of course we have to have an internet connection for this. And so what we're seeing is, notice that this is saying get and hit right in here. And so the list of packages is being downloaded, and it tells you the percent that's being downloaded. Right now we're at 60%, 25 different packages. And this is the list of the most recent packages that have been updated. And it's a little slow because they're working here on campus. And usually this flies through. Notice that some of these are going out to Linux Mint and some are going out to Ubuntu. And remember that Mint is just really a repackaged version of Ubuntu. Let me pause the video for a second. Okay, we're at 99%. And we're at 100%. And I haven't updated Mint 12 in a while, so that's why it's taking a little bit longer to fetch these packages. Notice that the update command actually didn't do any updating of the system. All it did was to download the list of packages and then compare the list of packages to what I have on my system right now. But it tells me that I need to perform an update so that my system has the most recent packages. And that's where the second command comes in. And what we'll do is that we'll just arrow up here once I get focus. And the second command is called safe upgrade. And so the second command will take the information from update and then ask me whether I do indeed want to update all the packages. And then here's a list of all the packages that it's suggesting that I update. And you see, oh, there's quite a few. Notice that it's going to download a new Linux kernel with some headers, and then all these other applications in here. Wow, that's going to take quite a while, but we're going to do this anyway. I'm not going to show all of it. And so it's saying that there's 351 packages to upgrade it, and 4 that need to be installed. We're not going to remove anything, and 0 not upgraded. So everything's going to be upgraded. It tells us how many megabytes we want to, that's going to be required to download. Do you want to continue? Notice that the Y is in capital letters, the N is in small case, that the capital letter is whatever the default is. And so the default is, if we just hit the enter or return key, will be yes. If we type in, it's going to get out of this program and not upgrade anything. So we're going to hit enter, and now it's going to the different software repositories that are appropriate for my Mint 12 installation and downloading those. And then after a few minutes, after it's downloaded everything, it will install these. So once it gets to about 99%, I will restart the video. And this is 12% completed. This tells you what percentage of the total number of files have been downloaded. Notice over here on the very far right hand corner at the bottom, it tells you the estimated elapsed time, or the estimated time for completion, and it went from like 14 minutes to 8 minutes very quickly, just in a matter of a few seconds. So it depends upon the connection that you have. It's just an estimate of how long it will take. Let me pause again. Okay, we're at 24%, and if at any time you decide that you want to get out of and you want to stop the process of this upgrade, just while it's downloading, you can hit Control-C in much the same way as you can do with anything if you're running something under DOS. I'm not going to do that right now because I'm already well into the process. Once it starts installing, I will restart the video, and once it does start installing these packages that it's downloaded, that's probably not something that you want to quit. You want to go ahead and allow the process to continue to its completion. Okay, and something that might happen when you're away from your keyboard for a while, or you've got a process like updating running in the background, is the screensaver will come on. So you can unlock that, and then if you want to go up here, and what we will do is we will turn that off, because that's really annoying. And we'll go to System Tools, System Settings, and then Screen. And it might look different if you're using a Mint 11 or a Mint 13, but this is what it looks like in Mint 12. Turn off after never. Lock screen turns off. We'll set that to an hour, and then we can go back and get out of there, and now we shouldn't be interrupted by that screensaver. And I'll pause the video again. Okay, so all the packages have been downloaded, and now notice that it's saying it's unpacking replacement. You're probably all familiar with zip files that are compressed files that makes files smaller. Well, Linux uses a type of compression that's a little different, and it's something that we will cover in this class, but it's called gzip. And so essentially that's what's happening right now, is that the packages that were downloaded are being uncompressed. And let me pause the video again. Okay, so we've got to a spot where it's asking us for some feedback. It's saying that the configuration file has changed. The package distributor has shipped an updated version. What would you like to do about it? Your options are install the package maintainer's version or keep your currently installed version. Notice the default is keep your currently installed version, so default in. So we're going to hit enter. And pause again. And the process is complete. So notice that there are 0 updates, so our system is now been supplied with the most up-to-date packages, so hopefully we'll be secure and stable for the time being. Okay, so that shows you how to do a couple of things, one of which is to use aptitude to update your system, as well as to use sudo. Let's jump back to sudo for a second. Let's type ls-al, and this is again the long listing. And notice in here in these 2 columns right here, going up and down, we have PC, again that's me, and we have PC here. What this is showing is, let's say for this first directory, this hidden directory, PC, I am the owner of this. Every file and every directory has an owner. We ask, well, what is the second column for? Well, that indicates that there's a group called PC, and I can have more than one user in that group, and we'll cover groups and access controls and groups in more depth a little later in the class. But for right now, this says that I own all these files. So remember I said that there was a user called root. Let's go to the root directory and do the ls-al again, and you notice who owns all these files. Root, and the user root, and the group root. So these are all the very important system files in here, and so we want root to be the only one who has access to these, for fear that somebody might accidentally come in and remove the files or change the files into a state that wouldn't allow you to boot or run the computer. So let's go down into, let's say, this directory right here, sbin, and I'll show you a little something. So sbin and then tab. Let's run ls-al again. Notice once again these are owned by root, and the directory, so all the files are owned by root, and the current directory and the parent directory are owned by root. So what if we wanted to create a file in here? Or what if we wanted to move a file in here or copy a file? So let's try to create a file in here. So I'm going to type touch 1.txt, permission denied. Why is that? Well, this directory is owned by whom? It is owned by root, and I'm running this command as PC. Therefore, I don't have access to this directory. I don't have the permission to touch this account. What if I did this? Sudo touch 1.txt. Supply the password. And I can run the command touch, though, using the sudo command, that is as root, and I can create the file. Now, this wasn't really a very practical example, but what that illustrates is the fact that there are access controls or permissions associated with both files and with directories, and you need to understand that. So if you ever see something, feedback such as permission denied, it's probably because you're trying to access a directory or a file to which you should not have access. So let's go back to our home directory. We're there, right? Okay, good. Let's now cover moving and copying a file. Just as in Windows you can move and copy files, so too can you in Linux. So I think we had my classes. I'm just going to keep hitting tab because we had some files down here in this directory. Okay, so let's copy some of these files, and let's do it a couple of ways. One of which is, let's see, ls-al. We've got the one.txt down here. Let's make a copy of that file. First, let's just make a copy right here in the same directory, and what we're going to do is we're going to call it, we're going to make a copy called 2.txt. So we copy 1.txt. So we're going to make a copy, but we're going to call it 2.txt. Hit enter. That's what we have. Well, it appears that we have an exact copy of 1.txt. And so that's how you make a copy of a file, and you name it with a name other than its original file name. Now let's say we wanted to copy this file. Let's say we want to copy 2.txt, but we want to place it, let's say, on the desktop. How would we do that? Okay, so we want to copy 2.txt, and there are several ways to indicate that we would like that to be on the desktop directory. We can either use something called the relative path, and this is something that we've talked about before, but I didn't use that terminology. The relative path is the path relative to where I am right now. So I can do this and keep going until I got to the point where I could point to the desktop. That's the relative path. The absolute path is looking at it from the opposite direction. That is starting, let's say, with a higher level path, such as the root directory, and then I can say home, PC, and then desktop. So the former example was that of a relative path, and that is an absolute path. What would be easier to do? Well, in this case, the absolute path would require fewer keystrokes and also be a little bit easier to understand, but even easier than that is using the home directory and that's an absolute path. So we copy that to our desktop, right? Because that's the equivalent of home PC, and that's the desktop directory. So let's go to the desktop directory and see if it's there. Oops. And there it is, 2.txt. What if I wanted to remove that file? Do you remember how to do that? rm2.txt, and it's gone. Let's see if it takes us back to summer. Okay, so the cd space dash takes us back to summer. What do we have here? We still have 1 -1, 1 and 2.txt. Okay, let's move the file. Let's move the file 2.txt to the desktop. So the move command is mv 2.txt to the desktop. Hit enter. Let's switch back to the desktop. There it is. Let's switch back to summer, and I want to rename 1.txt to something else. And in order to rename a file, we also use the move command. So if we use move 1.txt, let's call this 2.txt again, but it's going to be in the same directory. Enter. That's what we have. Notice now that 1.txt was renamed to 2.txt. Now, could we rename and move this file at the same time? Let's see if we could do that. Move 2.txt to the home directory, and we're going to name it 3.txt. Does that make sense? So we're moving 2.txt and we're renaming it to 3.txt under our home directory. Okay, it's gone from there. Let's go back to our home directory, and there's a 3.txt under our home directory. Okay, so that ends this lecture. We've looked at the use of sudo, how to use aptitude to update our system and to upgrade the packages on it. And we've seen how to use the move command as well as the copy command to manipulate files.